If you've never sold a home before, or even if you haven't, it has been a while, it can be a fairly stressful and intimidating process. So what I'm doing in this video is sharing what the home selling process looks like from start to finish. I've done several videos on specific parts of the home selling process. So when those parts come up, I'm going to have them display as cards at the top of the screen because there's going to be quite a few. So if there's a specific part you're interested in, you can go ahead and click on the card and that'll take you to the video that's relevant for that topic. We're going to be covering quite a few things because selling your home is a fairly involved process. So hang tight, let me know if there's any specific questions you have in the comments, and I hope you enjoy this video. The very first step in the home buying process is actually deciding to sell. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is one of those topics that I talked about, deciding to sell your home. Is selling right for you? It may be an obvious answer, it may not be, but you can check out that video if this is a question you have. Once you have decided to sell, the next step is deciding when to sell. If you have flexibility in when to sell, there's better times of the year and there's worse times of the year to sell. So you can check out that video as well. Number 3, again, another video I've done, but home prep. You have to prepare your home to sell well in advance. There may be projects, there may be repairs you want to do, there may be certain things that you want to do to get your home ready to sell. As soon as you can figure out what these things are, when you should do them, and get them done as soon as possible, the better. You can check out the video I did on this topic, and if you're interested in specifics, you can give me a call and ask questions, and I'd be happy to walk you through the process to make sure that you're doing the right things to sell your home. The next part, which you can actually do as step 4 or as a previous step, is finding the right realtor. Now there's a lot of different options you can do, and I actually talked about this in a video of whether you need a realtor or not, but most of the time people are going to use a realtor. I have another video where I talk about the 10 things that your real estate agent should do when selling your home. So the 5th step, once you've got your home ready, once you've got your agent chosen, once you've figured out all the prepping stuff, you actually sign the listing contract. So the listing contract is going to determine things like how many days a listing contract lasts, what the commission to your agent is going to be. You're going to set the price of your home and also determine all of the other contractual agreements between you and your agent. The next part is staging. Again, another video that I did discussing whether or not staging works or whether or not it's worth it, because it does work. So is it worth it to stage your home, and should you spend the extra money to do that? So the next part of the process, whether you've staged or not, is to do photography. And this is not just the photography, but the photography, the videography, and everything that's going to be used for marketing. This is actually really important to do because most people start out seeing homes online. And so you want to make sure that they're actually getting a clear picture of what the home looks like. So not just some pictures taken with an iPhone, which I can't believe agents are still taking pictures with their phones these days, but getting a full picture, as complete of a virtual representation of the home as you can possibly get. That way, people aren't coming to your home without knowing what it is. I can't tell you how many times someone went to property and said, oh, I didn't realize the layout was going to be like this, or it's too small, or I didn't know it only had one bathroom. So you want to make sure that people have an actual accurate representation of your home. Don't skimp on this. Don't go with an agent who's going to skimp on this. The marketing is something that I cover completely. People don't have to pay any money for marketing. There's a listing fee, and then if they decide to stage, there's that. But I take care of the rest. And it's a fairly significant investment because I believe so powerfully in the power of marketing. The other side of marketing is the print marketing. So this is stuff that's actually going to be physically inside the home. And some people say, well, why have print marketing when everything's digital? Well, the thing is, if people see multiple homes and they take something physical with them, they're going to have that to remember the home by. And if there's a beautiful layout and it's presented well, it's kind of like when you go to a hotel room and the hotel looks beautiful and they've got all these nice little things and amenities set up for you. That's not really why you're there. It's just the little extras that give representation and a feel that, wow, this is a really good place to be. So when the home itself is displayed nicely, if there's nice documents, there's nice pictures, it shows, hey, this person actually put some effort into this, and it gives a picture of quality rather than something that was haphazardly thrown together. At the same time, like I mentioned earlier, digital is extremely important. Social media is important. So this is why it's also good to see what their digital marketing strategy is. Do they email other agents in the area? Do they do promotions on social media? What are they doing to promote your property? This is an extremely crucial part of listing your home. So it's worth talking about a little bit more. So the photography, videography, and getting everything ready for marketing was step 7. Step 8 is the actual marketing process, like I've been talking about. So this takes a little bit of time to get everything compiled and ready to go and delivered to actually be the marketing materials. In case you're wondering, it's usually about 2 weeks from the time the photography is done until the listing goes live, because that's about how much time it takes to get everything printed, ready to go, all the stuff into the house and ready. So once that's done and once all the marketing material is ready and the listing is ready to go, that's when it's time to go live to the market. Once the home is live, your agent will work with you to schedule showings. If it's a really hot market, your home is in good condition and it's priced well, you may want to be out for the first weekend. Sometimes in hot markets, you can have as many as 30, 50, or even more showings crammed into a weekend. So rather than trying to stay in your home and constantly be going and coming back, going and coming back, it might be better to just be gone for the weekend. Now, when the market's not as hot, depending on the timing, it may be fine to be in your home because you may only have a couple showings a day. So you don't want to be out and completely gone if there's really no reason to. Whatever the case is, your agent is going to work with you and your schedule to make sure that if you can't be out of the home, that people aren't going into your home when you want to be there. And it's nice to have an agent doing this for you because sometimes it can be stressful trying to handle all of these things yourself if you have kids and jobs and everything else that you're trying to deal with. Typically in an opening weekend, there's going to be an open house. An open house is a great time for everyone to come into the home that may not already have an agent, and if there's restrictions on time, it allows everyone to come in all at once. Many times the people at the open house aren't going to be the people that actually buy the property, but sometimes it's a time where they'll bring their family and friends if they've already seen the property, and it's just a time for people to get a second viewing, or it's a time if people are looking at multiple properties and don't want to have to schedule everything, it's just easier for them to come into an open house. It's also an opportunity for people to ask the realtor directly questions about the home that they otherwise might not be able to ask. So the next step in the process is offers. Sometimes in a hot market, this can happen immediately. We've very recently seen where a home goes on the market on Thursday, there's tons of showings over the weekend and offers are due maybe Sunday or Monday, and then there's multiple offers that the agent and the homeowner are going through. If that's the case, then an agent is going to help you determine which offer is the best. And here's the hint, it's not always the highest. In fact, many times it's rarely the highest priced offer. I've seen multiple times where a high offer comes in, it seems like it's the best offer, but the offer maybe goes under contract and then falls apart because the buyer really didn't want to pay that much for the property and they got cold feet. So this is something that takes a lot of skill as an agent determining what's the best offer and what isn't. They have to kind of sniff through, so to speak, people's crap, honestly, because people will write all kinds of things that they don't mean. And so you have to determine what is the characteristic of the person writing the offer, what's the other agent's reputation, how good is their pre-qualification, what are the other terms they're offering, and how are things written, is it done in a professional manner. All of these things matter when looking at an offer. And it's why it's good to have an agent who is experienced and knows how to read through these things and determine and help you know what the best offer to choose is. It may also be helpful to go through a multiple offer spreadsheet, but again, this kind of doesn't give the real feel of the offer when you're just looking at a spreadsheet. So it's still good to have the agent going through and getting a gut feeling for which offer is the best, contacting each person directly and having a conversation with them, determining their motivation, because the last thing you want is to go under contract and then have to come back to the market. Very rarely, if you go back to the market after being under contract, are you going to get as high of a price or as good of a deal as you would have originally. In slower markets, it may take a little bit longer to get an offer. It used to be 6 months was the normal amount of time for homes to be on the market. 6 months of inventory is considered a balanced market. So 6 months of inventory means pretty much the average home's on the market for about 6 months. That's what we consider here a very slow market. Many homes are on the market for a month or less, but we're starting to see, at least in midsummer of 2022, we're starting to see things look a little bit more reasonable where homes aren't getting multiple offers the second they get onto the market. So it may take a little bit of patience, and it may also take a little bit more initiative on your listing agent's side to make sure that you are getting offers and that the offers are competitive. So I know a minute ago I just kind of spitfired some terms to be aware of, but the main things you're going to want to look at is what is the price, what's the earnest money they're putting down, which means if they bail after the inspections, how much money are you going to get as the seller? That pretty much shows how much they're willing to put on the line to buy the home. If someone has a very low earnest money, amount, it means that they're probably ready to back out at the first sign of trouble. If someone has a very high amount of earnest money, it means that they are probably very committed. One of the things that we started seeing a lot over the past couple of years is inspections. So sometimes people would say they would not do an inspection, or they would accept the house as is, but they wouldn't waive the inspection contingency, which I wouldn't recommend people do. But then as they go through the inspection, they say, oh, we found this and this and this, we weren't expecting that, and now we want money. So be aware when someone says a house is being purchased as is, because it never really means what they say. This is kind of fraudulent, honestly, in my mind, when someone says they're going to buy a house as is and not ask for repairs, and then they ask for repairs. So this is another thing that you have to really clarify and really figure out what people mean when they say as is, which sometimes you have to read between the lines a little bit. Or rather, your agent may need to read between the lines, because they're the ones who are going to be talking to the agent on the other side. In hot markets, appraisal gap coverage is something that you might consider. If someone's writing an offer way over asking, say a $50,000 over asking amount, but they don't have anything in there about an appraisal gap, meaning if the house doesn't appraise for the value, are they going to pay any more? And if not, then it's really not that great of an offer, because if a house doesn't appraise at least for what they're offering, then you've got no deal. Technically, per the terms of the contract, if a home appraises for less than the contracted amount, then the contract is void and it has to be renegotiated. So there has to be language about that. This is another reason why the down payment amount is important. If someone has a 3% down payment, that may be totally fine. But if something goes wrong, they have no room, they have no cash to take care of an issue. So seeing someone with a higher down payment means that if something goes wrong, there's a likely chance that they can take care of it because they have the funds to do so, and then they can just have a slightly lower down payment. So that's really the reason, and pretty much the only reason, why a down payment is important. It just shows that the person is a bit more qualified and can handle slightly bigger bumps in the road. So after going through the offers, the next step is to accept an offer, counter an offer, or reject the offer. So if you accept an offer, that means that you are technically under contract, and now you're having to abide by whatever terms the buyer has laid out in their agreement. It's really hard for a seller to back out of a contract once accepted. A buyer can back out for quite a few reasons, but a seller is pretty much locked in, so be careful which offer you accept. So the next part to think about is seller disclosures. Now, this may be something that you do before the listing goes live, which I recommend, because it's kind of stressful to be taking care of all of this while also dealing with all the offers. But the seller disclosures are essentially you as a seller saying all the different things that you're aware of with a property. Everything that's wrong that you're aware of, or there's a whole questionnaire that's essentially getting your representation of what you believe the condition of the property to be. Once the buyer gets these, they have 5 days to review it. And if there's something on there they don't like, they can also back out of the contract. Usually this happens within the inspection period, which is normally about 10 days or 10 business days, so really 2 weeks. So it's rare that the seller disclosures are used as a reason for someone to back out of the property, because even though the seller may or may not be aware of something, usually people are going to go by what the inspection says, because that's going to give almost always a more accurate representation than the seller disclosures. However, it's still very important for you to do the seller disclosures, one, because it's required by law, but also there may be things that you're aware of that the buyer's not. If it comes up that there's something that you were aware of and it can be proven you were aware of it, and the inspection didn't cover it and it becomes an issue for the buyer down the road, that can turn into a lawsuit, which is something you don't want. So it's best to be as clear as possible on the seller disclosures. And it's also a reason why your agent is actually not allowed to help you do the seller disclosures. If they help you answer something, but they're not actually aware of the condition of the property to the degree you are, that's a liability on them. So the law is that that's just not allowed. The next part through the process is making sure the buyer deposits their earnest money. If they don't deposit it, usually the contract says within 3 days, then technically they're breaching the contract. So if they don't deposit their money on time, you technically have grounds to back out of the contract and go back to the market. Now, usually this is not to your advantage, but it's just good to be aware of what's going on. And it's good to make sure that everyone's doing their part. So typically as a listing or buying agent, I'd always verify that the funds have been deposited on time. The next part is inspections, which I've already touched on a bit. So inspections are where the buyer has an inspector come in. They usually, like I said, have 10 business days or 14 calendar days to come in and get a view of what the property actually looks like. So they're going to be looking at mainly just the overall condition of the house. They're also going to be looking to see if there's radon in the house, which is an odorless, colorless gas that is actually really dangerous. So it's something they're going to be checking on. They're also going to check the condition of the sewer. They're going to go in the attic and the crawl space and basically figure out any issue that they can, and they're going to try to negotiate that with you. They may get quotes for repairs, meaning that they'll say, hey, this costs about this much. We'd like you to provide that to us in the amount of closing costs. They may say, we want you to provide X amount of dollars to us to fix this repair on our own, or they may ask that you do the repair yourself or that you hire a contractor to do the repair, which is typically what the preferred way is, to hire a contractor rather than do it by yourself. It's important to know what is reasonable to ask for and what isn't. This is why having a savvy listing agent, someone who's good at negotiation, who can push back as needed to know, hey, if they're asking for something that's unreasonable, then we can say that and say, no, that's not something that we're willing to do. However, we may be willing to do this. There's a lot of different ways to negotiate. At the same time, it's good to be reasonable, and the things that are reasonable to ask for, it's good to do and take care of. When push comes to shove, you really don't want to have to end up going back to the market. So it's good to be as accommodating as possible without being a pushover. But again, this is why it's good to have someone who's good at negotiation and knows about what that boundary is. You don't want to be hard to work with and make the situation sour, because it might make things go bad down the road. So it's just good to be aware of what people should ask for and what they shouldn't, and just be prepared for having a huge list and not to freak out when you get it. The main things that are reasonable for people to ask for are real deficiencies that they couldn't see during the showing. So a roof that is disclosed or is obvious that it's pretty old, well, that's not something that really needs to be repaired unless there's an actual issue with it. So if the roof is actively leaking, that's a problem. If the roof needs to be replaced in a couple years, but is currently working just fine, well, then usually that's going to have been priced into the home. So it's not something that's really worth being asked as a repair. Usually normal wear and tear things, whether it's a roof or whether it's a certain appliance being old, usually those don't suffice as repairs, which is why the negotiation here is very important. Both on the buyer side, they're going to try to get you to get those things taken care of, but on the listing side, it's really usually not worth it. Sometimes there won't be a way around it, and people will back out because they just didn't know that a furnace was going to be $15,000 and they didn't know that it was going to need to be replaced. So it may be worth it to work with these people. But again, that's a conversation with you and your real estate agent, and why it's good to know exactly what should be asked for, what shouldn't, and to just be able to negotiate well. The next part is the appraisal. The appraisal is where an appraiser comes in and they actually determine a value of the home. So they're going to look at other properties that have sold recently, and they're also going to take into consideration a little bit of what the current situation, what the market's doing. But really, value is determined by what has previously sold that is similar to your home. Now, this is really important because the loan depends on the appraised value being at least what the contracted sales price of the home is. A lender wants to make sure that if they're lending X amount of dollars on a house and they're saying, hey, we're giving this percentage based on this value, but a home's worth way less, then if the buyer forecloses on the home, then the lender doesn't want to be stuck with a home that's not as valuable as they thought it was. So that's why the appraisal is so important. Typically, an appraiser is going to need to get access to your home. They're going to come and just take pictures to verify the quality. So that's the second inspection. There's the home inspection, and then there's a shorter appraisal inspection. And those are the two times where someone's actually going to need to be in your home for an inspection. Once the appraisal happens, the buyer is going to get a copy of the report. You as the seller will not. All you're going to know is whether the home appraised at value, meaning at or above what the sales price is, or below. Typically, if you hear at value, that means that everything's good. If you find out that the home appraised for less than the value that was in the sales price, then that means either you're going to have to renegotiate if there was no clause about the appraisal, or if there was a clause about what would happen if the home appraised for less, then that's what's going to happen. That's why appraisal gaps are so important, because it takes some of the stress of that waiting out if you have offers that are way above asking. Now, typically, if an agent has done a good job and the price has been chosen fairly and based on previous comparable sales, then typically there's not going to be a problem with an appraised value. It's usually only when the offers are way above what the list price is. After the appraisal is typically when there's a bit of a waiting period. Usually this is the time that the buyer is working with the lender to go through all the underwriting process. They're getting the appraisal back and they're putting that through their whole process to make sure that the loan is clear to close. And once it's clear to close, then that's when the buyer is going to sign, and then you as a seller are going to find some time to sign all the documents. And then some point after that is when the loan is going to be able to close. Signing usually happens at the title company, but it can also be done remotely. Sometimes you can have an online notary, meaning you don't have to go anywhere, and they do a verification process online. Sometimes you can use a mobile notary, meaning someone comes to you and they do it that way. But one way or another, signing is the last step that needs to happen before closing. Before closing though, you will want to make sure that your utilities are set to be taken out of your name. The buyer is responsible for the day after closing to have the utilities go into their name. But you want to make sure that the utilities are in your name through closing day. It's important to have them turned off though, because if you continue to pay for the utilities and the buyer doesn't put them into their name, sometimes it can be, and I've seen this happen, not with my clients, but with other clients, where they realize that they were paying for some bill for a really long time, way after they were already out of the house. So make sure you turn off your utilities and get the utilities ready wherever you're going. One condition to this though is that if there's rent back, meaning that if you're staying in the home for some amount of time after closing, you're going to keep the utilities in your name until the last day of staying there. After that, you finish getting all your stuff out, you get your moving done, and typically it's courtesy to do a general cleanup so that the buyer is not walking into a huge mess. The main thing though is determining what stays and what goes. So if something is a fixture, meaning like blinds or curtains or something like that, or anything that's nailed into the wall, that's going to be staying with the home. Anything that's not listed in the contract, that's not attached in one way or another, you're free to take. And actually you have to take, otherwise you're breaching contract. So it's good to verify with the other agent, hey, what exactly is expected here and what's not. Sometimes not everything is in the contract. Usually an email agreement can be fine to say, hey, do you want this little chest over here, or do you want that desk, or whatever. And sometimes it can be done that way. So the next part is closing. Closing is when you signed all the documents, the buyer signed the documents, the lender has sent the money to the title company, and the title company is dispersing that money to you, the seller. So that's the funding side. And then the recording is when the deed is recorded as being in the buyer's name. So when it's recorded in the buyer's name and then you're funded, that's called recorded and funded, which is the same thing as closing. Now again, closing may not be the last thing if you have a rent back, meaning you're staying in the home, but in most cases, closing is going to be the very last thing. Well, that's pretty much it. The home selling process from start to finish. And now once all that's done, it's time to move on to the next stage of your life. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Make a comment of something that you're confused about or something that you'd like more clarification on. I'd be happy to help. And if you're thinking of selling your home, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to help you do so. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.